to everyone from Facebook as well. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone else joining us from world over. Welcome back to another session. This is our final session for the day, and it is one of the most anticipated sessions, at least for me. We have two keynote speeches today: climate resilience, transforming building for post-COVID-19. We have two very eminent speakers, Dr. Mustafa Kamal Gil, policy specialist green jobs at the International Labour Organization, as well as Professor Salim Ul Haq, who is the director at the International Center for Climate Change and Development in Bangladesh. So I would like to welcome the both of them, and I'm wondering if Vasita, Executive Director, would also like to say something, because this is one of the most look forward to panels. Vasita.
Thank you, Seni. Thank you, Dr. Gee and Professor Haq, for taking time to be here to deliver the keynote speeches. And I think we can go straight to the keynote speeches and we can get into the conversation afterwards. So if both of you are okay, maybe I'll start with Dr. Gee and then we'll pass to Professor Haq. So over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to join you at this event, and I'm also honored to be sharing this session with Professor Haq. And so I would like to speak from the perspective of green jobs and a just transition in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. I would like to use a presentation. I hope it would not take too long, but for that matter, I'll just perhaps start to share my screen. All right, so I hope it is okay. So as I was saying, I would like to just focus on green jobs and just transitions in the post-COVID-19 context. Before I do that, just a few words about the International Labour Organization. So I can assume that our audience is familiar with the ILO, but just suffice to say, we are a specialized agency of the United Nations, and the ILO is one of the oldest agencies in the UN system, set up after the World War. And it's important to mention that the ILO has the specificity of being a tripartite UN agency, which means that our constituents are made of representatives of governments, but also employers and workers organizations. The ILO is essentially a normative organization mandated to develop international labor standards, but with the purpose of promoting decent work for all and advancing social justice around the world. Now, we have all seen how devastating the COVID-19 pandemic has been on the world of work, with a massive disruption to economic and social activity. And there is a view that this of long-term consequences. I just wanted to flag a few aspects of this impact in the world of work. The ILO has been measuring the impact of the pandemic on the world of work, on jobs and incomes, through what we call an ILO COVID-19 monitor, which has gone through several editions of it. But in the latest one, it has been measured that when we account for the loss of working hours, the time that has been lost simply because of the lockdown measures and disruptions in the world of work, only in the third quarter of 2020 that we are in, this is equivalent to 1.5 million full-time jobs. Now, it has impacted enterprises in a very significant way. We have measured that 400 million enterprises worthwhile, when we account for employers, those who employ others in their enterprises, but also the own account workers, those at their own account that have been affected by the crisis. Now, when enterprises cannot run business as they do, obviously it impacts on the income of workers. One of the indicators that we use in the world of work is what is referred to as working poverty. So it essentially means people, women, men that wake up every day, go to work to earn an income, but who still remain at a level of within poverty. So we found that the decline in income that this pandemic has caused in the global working population will push the global working poverty with an additional 270 million. Here, there's a mistake. We talk about million. It's 270 million workers that will find themselves in extreme poverty. There's a gender dimension because we've seen how certain sectors related to the service industry, the medical, the hospitality sector have been impacted. And these are industries where there's an important participation of female workers in the workforce. So we've estimated that globally almost 510 million workers, or 40% of female women workers, have been in those sectors impacted. And finally, as we in the Youth Summit, there has been a massive impact on young people around the world. And the ILO ran a survey this summer, and we found that at that time, this was August, 1 out of 6 young people around the world had lost jobs. Now, there has been a sort of bright side of this situation of the pandemic because of the lockdown measures. Obviously, we've seen that the global carbon emissions have been declining, at least for some time. And this has led to some to believe that if we lock down the economies, if we constrain economic activity in the way government have done it during this pandemic, it is possible to drastically address many of the environmental challenges, including air pollution, etc. So therefore, we think it's very important to get our narrative right here. And the message is that there should not be mutually exclusive choices to be made between environmental sustainability on the one hand and vibrant economic activity, jobs, and incomes on the other. It is possible to pursue both a prosperous economic development for all and address environmental challenges. I think what the crisis has shown in some way is that when there is a will, there is a way. And the way government have reacted to the health pandemic could be done in the same way to address the environmental challenges. But just to make sure that we're not making choices between socio-economic development, which is indispensable in many parts of the world, and environmental sustainability. Now, this slide is just telling us a framework that we've used in the ILO to work with our constituents. In a context of economic crisis, it was important to stimulate the economy and employment, getting enterprises working. And this was the second pillar, to support enterprises in business continuity, expand social protection where it was required. And because many had to work, even if we still are in a context of a pandemic, we know that there are over 2 billion workers in the informal economy. These are people who need to go out every day to earn a living. They cannot stay at home and telework like some of us had the privilege of doing. And therefore, it was important to ensure that those workers are not exposed and that occupational safety and health measures in the workplace are in place. And finally, the importance of social dialogue. I mean, the crisis has shown that solutions are possible if governments work with social partners and other actors in the real economy. And this is what we believe to be the right direction to face the crisis and to recover from it. I want to turn now to what we think to be a major opportunity for a recovery out of this health pandemic, which will take the world in a direction slightly different from where we're coming from. I think there's been a strong realization that this health pandemic has revealed through its economic and social consequences, the vulnerabilities we have in our economic and social systems today, the unacceptable level of inequality, the fact that many don't have social security that allows them to stay at home and earn a living if there's a risk of to their lives to be going to the streets. So we should not be thinking of going to business as usual. And so that's why in the ILO, through the Director General, there has been this notion of going back to a better normal. And so that better normal should be addressing all the deficiencies we see in the world of work, but at the same time, prepare for other challenges that are on their way. And that's the environmental crisis, of which climate change is of paramount importance. And that is where we see the opportunity for a green recovery. And I think that if we look around the world, we can observe that the pandemic has demonstrated a very huge capacity of young female and male workers, entrepreneurs around the world who have come up with many innovative solutions to face the health pandemic, but also in business continuity solutions. I would just want to go to some of these examples, and I hope we can discuss them further. We've seen a lot of startups, and many are, I must say, by young people who have found ways to develop health protection systems. What I'm showing here is a startup in Ghana that use ICT-based solutions to allow for the collection of samples for medical testing from remote hospitals using drones, so that you avoid the typical congestion that we know is common in many parts of the world. And this is a very innovative approach to facing situations like this. And these are opportunities for business development that could be supported and expand going into the future. We have seen that the business disruption for some of the sectors of the economy, like the hospitality industry, but also manufacturing, the fashion industry, they have all suffered from this crisis. And this is what has pushed many of the enterprises and workers in that industry to diversify. So many went into the production of medical equipment so that they maintain their business going and supply the health equipment and that countries needed to face the pandemic. We have also seen the way in many parts of the world, touchless hand washing systems were developed using recycled materials. So all this idea of business diversification has been very prominent within the crisis. And I think this is giving new opportunities for enterprise development and job creation. And I want to talk to another sector which has been hugely disrupted, and this is the food system because of the breakdown in global logistics. Those countries that typically import food for their nutritional needs have needed to find ways to produce food locally. And I think the good side of it is that it has given a new breath to urban farming. We've seen many countries from Bangkok to countries and cities, Bangkok, Amsterdam, Paris, to go in that direction. And if we take the case of Singapore, it went into setting targets that by 2030, they now want to meet all their 30% of their nutritional needs through local production systems. And this will promote micro-enterprises, creating jobs locally, and that can also support the environmental sustainability agenda with all the benefits that urban farming can deliver in improving air pollution in cities around the world. Now, some of the messages that we think are important is for enterprises going into the future to better manage risk. We know we faced a health pandemic, but it is just a precursor of other things that are likely to come. And I want to name the biodiversity challenges, the risk of climate change. And therefore, it's important to think of enterprise risk management practices. And this is an area, again, where social dialogue between workers and employers is very important to get the world of work in enterprises ready for the future. And I think also in terms of logistics, there has been, of course, an important and massive disruption in the global supply chains. But a good side of it is that it has pushed companies to rethink the way they manage their supply chains, and many had to go into micro supply chains relying on domestic suppliers. And often these are closer to the consumption markets, which means that there are ways to reduce the carbon emissions from global transportation, but at the same time open up new opportunities for business in the local economies with companies around where consumers are. I want to end by just mentioning a few areas of work that the ILO has been focusing efforts on, specifically on enterprise development, business continuity. And I want to refer to the Partnership for Action on the Green Economy, which is a joint program by the ILO, UNDP, UN Environment, UNIDO, and UNITAR, which is now engaging with 20 countries around the world to support their green economic recovery. It's looking very promising. And I want to end by mentioning the Climate Action for Jobs initiative, which is a new program we're also launching and seeking to engage with a wide range of partners. We are very much looking at young people in organizations. They drive to join us in this initiative so that we can collectively support the ambition of governments to raise the level of climate action, but at the same time secure decent jobs, green jobs for young people around the world, promote social justice, and ensure a just transition for all. So thank you so much. I hope I have not been long, and I very much look forward to a fruitful exchange. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's always great to hear about how climate change works with job creation, youth, and resilience, and how things are in real life. So that was very helpful. Moving on, now we have Professor Huck, who is the director of ICAD. I think I've known you since I started working on climate change. He's been a pioneer in adaptation-related work, loss and damage, so basically anything to do with resilience. So over to you, Professor Huck. I think you're muted.
Thank you very much, Vasita. And thank you, Mustafa, for that excellent presentation. Let me thank you for inviting me to join you here today. It's my pleasure. And what I will do is share with you a little bit about my work and then share some thoughts about how we can go forward and how we might be able to potentially collaborate with SLYCAN, ILO, ourselves, and others who are working on this similar issues in different countries around the world. So to describe my work, I'm currently the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development, based at the Independent University Bangladesh in Dhaka, where I'm speaking from. Most of my work is on what we call locally led adaptation to climate change, In other words, working with the most vulnerable communities in the most vulnerable countries in Asia and Africa in particular, to see how, on the one hand, they will be affected and impacted negatively by the impacts of climate change, but more importantly, how can they be assisted and enabled and capacitated to be able to cope with or adapt to the impacts of climate change. And we've been doing this for quite a long time with many different partners around the world, including Vosita and her colleagues in Sri Lanka. Now, in the last year, we got hit by COVID. The whole world got hit by COVID. We got hit by two parts of the COVID problem. Firstly, the public health problem of the virus contaminating people, hospitalizing them, leading to many deaths. And the second part of the problem, which often was much, much more important in terms of impacts on livelihoods, as we just heard from Mustafa, was the economic downturn, the lockdowns, the loss of livelihoods for people, particularly the poorest people living in cities, in the slums of cities like Dhaka and Colombo and others, who were badly affected by the lockdown measures, as well as by the virus infections taking place as well. And we are still in that situation, although hopefully with the vaccine becoming available, we might see some light at the end of the tunnel, but it will still take some time. Now, in that situation, what happened was that we had been working with quite a number of these vulnerable communities, particularly in the urban slums, with the global network of Slum Dwellers International. They work in many hundreds of towns and cities around Asia, Africa, Latin America, with these groups with whom we had been engaging on climate change. But then they got hit by the COVID crisis and the economic crisis associated with the COVID crisis. And we started engaging with them on that issue. And we have been producing a series of stories or blogs, we call them Voices from the Front Lines, of these young people, mainly young people of communities who are actually taking actions. They're not sitting idle, they're engaging, they're involved in helping their communities with food or with medical help. And we saw a number of very nice examples that Mustafa shared as well. They're happening everywhere. And that is a good sign. That is a positive outcome out of this very big negative impact that COVID is having on us. And to us, that is a ray of hope on which we hope we can build things going forward. So now moving into the future, as it were, and we heard from Mustafa the efforts of the ILO to have a green recovery, a building back better. There are all kinds of terminologies being used of not going back to the old ways, the old normal, going to a new normal. These are all excellent ideas. They are some things that we should strive for, should try to achieve, but I'm not quite sure how much of that we will persuade our leaders to actually take forward and change the way that they have been working. So what I will now share with you is a few of my thoughts on where do we stand now at the cusp of the end of the 2020 year, and as in a few more days we will enter at the new year of 2021, and indeed the new decade from 2021 to 2030. I would say three main messages and issues that we might be able to take forward. The first one is the need to rely on the science. I think one of the biggest lessons and illustrations of which countries did all right and which countries did very badly in terms of dealing with the pandemic was the leaders of which countries listened to their scientists, took actions accordingly. They were able to protect their populations. Examples like New Zealand and Taiwan come to mind. Countries where the leaders did not listen to the science led to huge numbers of people being infected and many thousands dying of the disease. And the biggest and most rich country in the world under President Trump comes to mind as the classic example of a leader who just did not believe in the science. That lesson that we have seen within a matter of months for the impacts of COVID in different countries is orders of magnitude more bigger when it comes to climate change. The climate scientists have been telling the world leaders about climate change. World leaders have listened. We have global agreements. We have the Paris Agreement, but everything is too slow. And some leaders don't believe in it. And Mr. Trump is a classic example. He didn't believe in climate change either. So without taking collective action, then the impacts of climate change are going to be much, much more severe than the impacts that we are seeing in terms of COVID. And that's something we must try to avoid. Global leaders hopefully will be able to learn lessons, take things forward. We have just had on the 12th of December, the anniversary, the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, a major climate summit held by Prime Minister Boris Johnson of the UK, who will be the incoming president of the next Conference of Parties, COP26, which has been postponed from November this year to November next year. But he held a meeting, a virtual meeting on the 12th of December called the Climate Ambition Summit to bring countries together to raise ambition to try and reach the global goal, temperature goal, to bring it down. It was already headed for 3 degrees. We've got a lot of promises that are bringing it towards 2 degrees. We want to push further and get countries to bring it to 1.5 degrees. But these are all things that global leaders, prime ministers, presidents, and so on, are going to have to commit to and do them. In the Climate Change Conference of Parties jargon, we call these nationally determined contributions, reports that countries have to give. The deadline for submitting them is 5 years after the Paris Agreement, is this year, 2021, December 31st. We hope that most countries will be able to do it, although some countries may miss that deadline. Some countries are saying that they will do it by COP26, which is November next year, which is not really fair because the deadline was the end of this year. But nevertheless, that is happening, which is a good sign. Countries are beginning to take measures that will reduce their emissions. The measure that is most relevant is how quickly are countries committing to become carbon neutral or go to net zero. You'll see this term net zero carbon emissions being 2050, or China says 2060. President Biden, incoming President-elect Biden, is saying 2050 for the US administration, that he will be heading soon, and so on, different countries. Some countries are even earlier. Costa Rica is saying 2030. So it's about how quickly are countries offering to or planning to or pledging to reach the net zero, where they bring their own emissions down to net zero. That's a good sign. We're moving in the right direction. We're not moving fast enough. We have to accelerate, but that's a good sign. The second issue is about how to enable the vulnerable communities in the vulnerable countries cope with the impacts of climate change. And I will argue that this year, 2020, will be remembered in the future, not just for COVID. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic will be a major issue that will remain in the history books for this particular year, but it's also the year in which we are crossing the threshold into a globally changed world, where human-induced climate change, global temperatures have already risen above 1 degree, some places considerably higher than 1 degree, and that is affecting the global planetary weather patterns, from super cyclones in our part of the world. In the Bay of Bengal, we had a super cyclone in May last year, a few months ago, that caused a lot of devastation in India and Bangladesh, super wildfires in Australia and in California, the hurricanes that hit Central America and the United States. All over the world, wherever we look around the world, we are seeing much, much bigger impacts, and we will remember these years no longer as the hottest year in memory. They are going to be the coolest years when we look back in future to the globally warmed world that we are entering in 2020. And therefore, we need to be much, much better prepared. And unfortunately, we are not. the most vulnerable communities in the most vulnerable countries are being left largely to their own devices. Governments and international organizations are promising to do things. They are doing a little bit, but they're not doing enough. Just to give you one example, the rich countries promised 5 years ago in Paris, this was another promise along with the temperature reduction promise, to provide $100 billion a year from this year, 2020, 5 years after Paris. But we're now ending the year, coming to the 31st within a matter of days, and we are nowhere near reaching 100 billion. In fact, the best count that one can make is that maybe 70 to 80 billion might be available. The other big difference, or big problem with the amount of money being available is not much of it is going to help the most vulnerable to adapt to the impacts of climate change. The developing countries are asking for half the money to go to adaptation in the most vulnerable countries, but so far only 20% of the amount available at the global level is going for adaptation. 80% goes for mitigation or reducing greenhouse gases. Not that they should not go for that, but the proportion in our view is wrong. They should be 50-50 adaptation and mitigation support from the developed countries' finances that they're providing. And so let me now move to the third and final element of how we can take things forward. And in my view, this is probably the most important. It's certainly the one I am most involved in, and that is citizens, people themselves, and in particular, young people. We have seen, one young teenager from Sweden, Greta Thunberg, take individual action. She sat in front of the Swedish parliament with a placard all by herself. She didn't tell anybody else to do it. She just sat there in protest every Friday. Instead of going to school, she would sit outside the parliament on her own. Initially, she didn't get much attention. Then she started getting attention. Then other school kids started joining her. And now there's a global movement. Every Friday, kids are coming out of school all over the world. We have a big Fridays for the Future group here in Bangladesh, and I'm sure you have in Sri Lanka and other places as well. They are showing the way. They are the ones who are pointing out to the adults, their own parents and their leaders, that they are not doing the right thing. And as Greta says, we are in an emergency, we're in a crisis. We have to declare, and many people are actually declaring a planetary emergency or a climate change emergency, but it's just words. They're not converting that into practice. I mean, if it's an emergency, then you have to deal with it like an emergency, but we're not seeing that happen. So the opportunity to me now is for young people across the world to collaborate, to get together, to join forces. And one of the opportunities that has arisen, unintended consequence of the lockdown measures around the world, which has forced all of us to now live in this virtual world, is that the virtual world does allow us to connect with each other across the world. I don't have to fly to Colombo to be in your event. We are now doing this event, and I'm sitting at home from morning till evening, joining events all over the world. And we are now, my institute in Dhaka in Bangladesh is going to be doing a major event in January, which we used to do as a physical event. It's called Gobeshona. Gobeshona is a Bangla word for research, and it's a platform of many universities and think tanks and organizations and NGOs who work on climate change in Bangladesh, more than 50 institutions. Every January, we used to get together physically over 4 or 5 days in my university in Dhaka. We also got a lot of international participants who flew in to participate with us. But now, because of the lockdown and inability to travel, we are making it a virtual event from in January 2021. But we are now going to make it a permanently virtual event. And by virtue of being a virtual event, we're making it a global event. So instead of just being a Bangladesh-based event, it's a global event for 7 days, starting on the 18th of January, going to the 24th of January. And we will be running it in 8-hour segments, 24 hours a day for 7 days of that week, starting in the Asia Pacific time zone, then moving to the Africa and Europe time zone, and then moving to the Americas time zone, and then coming back again the following day. So we'll have sessions running 24 hours for different parts of the world. And we are looking for people to share what they're doing on what we are calling locally led adaptation, namely most vulnerable communities themselves taking actions and sharing what they're doing with each other. And we will do this every year for the next decade, starting in 2021, going all the way to 2030, and use this event every January to bring everyone together and share what we are doing and learn from each other and join forces in solidarity with each other so that we can have a much stronger bottom-up approach to solving the problems. And the final element to mention there is that we have a very, very strong emphasis on young people being involved. So every session involves young people. Youth have a different, they have their own sessions, but they're also embedded and mainstreamed into all the sessions that we are having on different themes and on different geographies. And we would love to collaborate with everyone who's in this event in Sri Lanka and elsewhere who might wish to join. I'll put the links in the chat box, and Vasita can share it with you later if anybody's interested. I'll stop there, and I'll be happy to answer questions or have a further discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Huck. That was very useful and actually resonated with what you just said. Had it also not been for the pandemic, and this is something that we've been talking about the past few days as well, this event wouldn't have been possible, and we do it locally as well, but now we've managed to also get participants as speakers from across the world, which presents a unique opportunity on its own. So so thank you very much, Dr. Mustafa and Professor Huck. Dr. Mustafa, I would also welcome you to maybe turn on your camera while we do the Q&A for the next few minutes. So we have a question here from Suramya. Thank you. It's on the chat. So thank you both panelists for the insightful, thoughtful information. Dr. Mustafa, do you feel that encouraging climate-friendly startups and innovation would be the answer to the labor crisis we are currently going through? Dr. Mustafa, are you with us?
Yes, do you want me to respond to that?
Yes, please.
Question directly? Well, I think there is an opportunity to support all these startups that came with innovative ideas to fight a health pandemic, but doing that in a way that also enables a green recovery. You know, when we saw how the use of recycled material has been deployed to develop touchless wash handling systems and solutions like that, they offer opportunities. So as a matter of fact, in the work we're doing under the Partnership for Action on the Green Economy, which I mentioned we're engaging in now 20 countries, the IO is proposing action to identify all these innovative business solutions and ways to support them. So for me, it is one avenue to help young people at the same time drive economic recovery, because this is an economic crisis. What needs to be done is to get business back to work so that they can hire people, people can earn an income and get back to their normal life. So I do see a significant opportunity in that direction.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa. And Professor Huck, I'm actually going to come back to you quickly on the conference that you mentioned. And since you've been it's been happening for so long, and this, as part of our youth forum, we've also actually called for proposals to be submitted. And currently, if you are aware, and for the others joining in, the proposals have been shortlisted and we selected 8, and now they've been developed in a new second stage. So maybe if there's any advice on, structuring these proposals and what to maybe keep in mind when developing a proposal, especially because also keeping in mind, the ambitions and the targets that each countries have, if you could maybe shed some light on that.
Sure. So there are, I think, 3 stages that everybody who is interested to develop their knowledge and actions on taking environmental issues or problems or climate change specific issues and problems. The first one is to make oneself sufficiently knowledgeable about the problem itself. Environment, climate change, these are scientific issues. There is a certain amount of scientific information that needs to be acquired. People can study and do it themselves nowadays on the internet. You can acquire all this information. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the scientific body that has done these huge scientific reports. Everything is in the public domain. You can download and read things yourselves. You don't need to go to a college or university. If you want to do that, that's fine, but it's not essential. So learning about the problem, number one, from the science. Number two, looking around where you are, wherever you happen to live, look out your window, look out on the street when you go walking, look out in the surrounding area that you are living in, the waters, the terrestrial landscape, and you will see problems. You'll see pollution. You'll see people cutting down trees. You'll see people polluting the water bodies. These are bad. These are bad things. These are not good things. And so you need to choose something that you think is a bad thing that is happening in your neighborhood or nearby, where you can do something about that. You don't have to ignore it. And so pick something that you think is doable. And then the third step then is you have to go from problem to solution. You can't just say, there's a big problem, somebody should do something about it. That is no longer an acceptable attitude to have by young people anymore, in my view. Young people have to recognize the problem and say, that's not right. I need to do something about it. Let me find out what I can do, which means you then have to look for like-minded people who are dealing with it, who are maybe you'll find somebody's already working on this issue. Go and join them, join forces with them. If they're not working on it, you don't find anybody, then start yourself. Get your friends and your schoolmates and your other people to join forces on something and do something yourself. So you have to do something. And then you need to scale it up. You need to look for support, like the examples that we heard from Mustafa of financiers giving you money to do things, or government supporting you to do things. And then you can also become more effective advocates with the government. Instead of telling them, you're doing a bad job, why aren't you doing this? You say, look, I am helping. We are doing something in a small scale, but this needs to be scaled up. And if you help us, we can scale it up. We young people around the country, we can all scale it up. So I call this a three-step process of going from problem analysis very quickly into the solution space. If you don't move from analyzing a problem and talking about a problem into the solution space of what can I do about it, then you are not doing enough. Just talking about a problem and blaming somebody for the problem is not enough anymore. You have to say, there is a problem, but I am not going to accept that this problem cannot be solved. We cannot do anything about it. I'm going to try and do something about it. And I'm going to find people who will help me, people I can join forces with to do something about it. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Haq. And I know that's not directly related to our main topic here, but I think since we do have a lot of those who submit proposals and those registered, and a lot of young people on this call, I think these constant words of encouragement are needed. So thank you very much for that. We have two questions from Posita, and I think both Dr. Mustafa and Professor Haq could answer that. So the first one, fashion and apparel industry is a key component of the economies in many countries, including Bangladesh. How can we address just transition and build resilience in this sector, and any activities that ILO is taking on this topic and in Bangladesh? Is this a focus? So maybe Dr. Mustafa could answer and followed by Professor Haq. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a very important question, because obviously we've seen how the textile in general industry has been impacted, the apparel industry has been impacted by the crisis. The ILO did a sector study on textile and how the COVID-19 impacted the industry. I'll be happy to just provide the link to that sector study. But I wanted to also say that we in the ILO run a large program known as Better Work. So Better Work is a joint program of the ILO, the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank, and a number of donors who are interested in supporting enterprises, including small and medium-sized enterprises in many sectors, but including the textile and apparel industry, to improve labor productivity and conditions of work. So Better Work is very active in Bangladesh. Now, for the past several years, we have been engaging with our colleagues who run Better Work with this idea that it's not just labor productivity that matters, because their focus is how to improve working conditions so that those enterprises could be more productive from a labor productivity perspective. We've been looking at how to bring a resource productivity dimension in Better Work, so that the enterprises also look at, pollution. We know that water pollution is one of the issues important in the textile industry, occupational safety and health, air pollution. And I also want to mention that we've done a study last year looking at the impact of heat stress on the world of work. So the fact that we're getting temperatures going up, how that impacts on the health and safety of workers, but also productivity. And we find that on average, if the current patterns of warming, and I must say, Professor Hack, that study we did is based on data from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which we took, the IPCC measures how heat stress impacts on the economy in economic cost. We've tried now to turn it into loss of jobs. And we, on average, the world is going to lose about 2% of total working time. Now, when you turn that 2% into what we call full-time work equivalencies, it comes to 80 million jobs likely to be lost between now and 2030. Now, I want to mention that 2%, 2.2%, that's the exact figure, is the global average. When we look at world regions that are most vulnerable, as Professor Hack was saying, like Southern Asia or Western Africa, we are close to 5% of working time that is going to be lost. And this is specifically in sectors like construction, agriculture, but also the textile, where people will work within factories. So therefore, all of these are important issues. I think we need to factor in beyond the COVID-19, but look at the apparel industry and how warming of temperatures will impact workers within factories, and what that means in terms of new norms of occupational safety and health for the workforce that takes into account the climate risk.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa. That was a very elaborate answer. Thank you very much. And I'm wondering if Professor Hack could perhaps add to that with maybe, yeah.
Sure. So let me just add to what Mustafa just said. In the case of Bangladesh, and I'm sure this is also true for Sri Lanka and countries in South Asia, the apparel industry, garments, textile, fashion, whatever we want to call it, is a major employer, particularly in Bangladesh, of women. Millions of women have jobs in these industries, and they got badly hit, not just by the pandemic and having to be isolated and so on, but the cancellation of orders. All of these were export-oriented industries, and immediately the buyers stopped the orders, and many of the buyers refused to pay for anything and so on. And the industries themselves went through both the owners of the industry as well as the workers in the industries went through a very bad patch. But, Bangladeshis are resilient. They quickly turned around, and the example that we heard from Mustafa earlier of started making, PPEs for the medical establishment and world, and making masks, for example. These have now become big industries in many of these. And then also, to be fair, at the global level, some of the buyers in the developed countries have realized that they can't just cut off completely. They need to also honor their contracts and maybe continue some of the supplies. And even the fashion industry itself is rethinking the whole notion of sustainability in that industry as a whole, because it's a very unsustainable industry, the old normal. And the new normal coming out from now has to become a different kind of industry, ranging all the way from consumers choices, buying too many clothes. Why do we need so many clothes? We don't need as many clothes as we keep on buying, to buying the right kinds of clothes, reusing, and so on. So there is a whole potential shift in the way that we do things in the fashion stroke textile apparel industry that I think all the players in that industry will think about and find ways to improve the situation from where it was before, which was not a very good. It was a very big industry, very lucrative industry for some, but it had a very big downside, both in terms of its social impacts as well as its environmental impacts, which cannot be allowed to keep on going anymore.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a very relevant question even here in Sri Lanka, because I think during the pandemic, we realized because some of the garment factories was impacted by COVID directly, and then working conditions and the minimum wage, they all came in discussions, which I don't think would have arisen had it not been for the situation. So actually maybe also there are two more questions. I think we do have a bit of time. Does COVID-19 recovery present an opportunity to change systems to address the fashion sector? So, so you all did mention that we are rethinking this and the conversation has begun, but in terms of systematic change, what does it look like the way forward?
I think there's a big opportunity for systemic change, and I'm not an expert in this sector, but from anecdotal information that I happen to be coming across, I am seeing that people are questioning. At least the good thing is people are saying that, the old way we did things was not a good way of doing things. And so what we should not be looking to do is to go back to the old way. We should be looking to do something different, better, more improved. And the other thing is that everybody's in this together. The whole supply chain, from the garment worker in Bangladesh to the consumer in the UK or in Europe or in America, is all part of a big chain. And all of us need to take a role, play a role as conscious citizens, conscious consumers, in making decisions that are more environment friendly and socially friendly as well. And that is a big realization that I think COVID-19 has revealed. It is revealing, if you look at the impacts of it, it's on poor people, even in the rich countries. It's the minority communities who are being badly affected. The rich people are sitting at home working from home. The poor people can't afford to sit at home and work from home. They're out there earning a living, even in rich countries, and they're the ones who are dying disproportionately from the infection. So this inequality of negative impacts of COVID is equally true of negative impacts for climate change, and is something that should not be accepted any longer. And so any measures to recover need to take that into account and not try to recover to the bad old ways, but to try and recover to a new normal, as we heard from Mustafa. And the ideas are there. We all know what needs to be done. We just need to do it at scale. And that really has not happened yet.
Thank you, Dr. Haq. Dr. Mustafa, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I do think that the pandemic is an opportunity for systemic change, but we also are aware of the challenges to convince many of the leaders and decision makers of the world to actually do that. When one reviews how much money has gone to revive the economy and how much of that has actually gone in a direction of addressing the systemic challenges of inequality. We find people locked down at home, not being able to go out, not having social security to provide them with an income. is money that governments are putting for economic recovery going to correct for that? We're not seeing it to the scale that it needs to be. So I think there is a major opportunity, but it requires political engagement. And in my view, the political engagement in the world we live in today, where the majority of people on this planet are young people, can very much be influenced if young people engage in social issues, economic issues, issues of political importance, because leaders listen. And I think even in the context of the UN climate agenda, it's not by accident that the UN Secretary General himself has now put in place a team of young advisors, because he realizes the power of young people to influence policy and political agendas. And I think that young people must be more aware of the power in their hands, and shape the future of work, of the world that we want, and one that would be a better world for all.
Thank you very much. And there is one final question, and I want to add to that a bit, and perhaps it could come off as closing remarks from both eminent panelists. So the question is on consumption patterns, and sustainable consumption and production has actually been one of the main topics of interest even pre-pandemic. For those of you joining us, just to briefly mention, we do have a sustainable SCP project where we try to promote sustainable lifestyles and meat-free and meat reduction, at least among consumers. And also, this has been and especially during the pandemic, and with changes in the global narrative, and even with changes among perceptions with young people, there has been more conversation on living sustainably. So keeping that in mind, as well as our theme for today, which is climate resilience and building back post-COVID-19, would you like to perhaps present any closing remarks?
Shall I go first? Great, thank you very much. So you're quite right that the concept of sustainability and sustainable living in all of our personal lives, in terms of the clothes we buy, the food we eat, the house we live in, the transport we use, all of this has been for some time now of interest by various groups, but they have tended to be minority groups. You have groups that are thinking about it, mostly young people, by the way, not that many older people, but some older people as well. What I think has happened with the COVID-19 crisis and related crises around the world is that this has come to a head. We have, the world has come to a jerking stop. And this jerking stop allows us to start afresh. Do we need to be flying around the whole world like we used to do? We don't. The planes have stopped. Do the planes have to go back to the same way that we were flying around the world like crazy? As I said earlier, we can connect by Zoom now. We don't need to fly around the world as much as we used to. So let us use this opportunity to think through our old ways of doing things into a new way of doing things. And in the sustainability jargon or area of studying and coming up with solutions, there's this new or relatively new concept of circular economy. So instead of just continuing things, we see what we can do and bring things back without more and more new things. And so that really is something that we need to be thinking about more systematically, globally. It will take time, but it's an opportunity for innovation, for new scientific methods and technologies. We have been using science for the wrong things in the past. Can we use science for the right things in the future? Again, it's as Mustafa said earlier, it's an opportunity for systemic change by questioning everything that we do or have done up to now, and say, do we really need to do it the same way after we get out of the COVID? And the answer in many cases will be no, there's a better way. Let us look for that better way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Haq. Dr. Mustafa?
Well, just in the same line, I think in particular when it comes to consumption patterns, young people are big drivers of consumption. I think there is also a sense of responsibility in making the right choices of consumption. And that is, what is going to drive production. We say, in economics that supply follows demand. If the consumers demand the right things, then enterprises and producers will follow. And so there's a responsibility, I think, that young people can have in shaping that future pattern of consumption and production that is more sustainable. And I think in relation to a question I see here on mental health, what the pandemic has also shown is that we don't need so much material goods to be happy. Many people who never spend so much time with their families. I lived in Japan for 12 years. I know how Japanese, like the kind of work you never spend time with your family. But with lockdown, people teleworking realize that, well, you can have a professional life, be productive, but have time with your family as well. And I think we realize that many people going into the future are actually looking at options that allow them to better balance work and social responsibility with their families and society in general. So this will hopefully improve mental health for all of us. And I think it's also, a silver lining that we should take out of this pandemic.
Thank you very much. And I know we're 1 minute over time, but I would quickly like to invite our Executive Director, Vasudha Vijayanayaka, for a very exciting announcement.
Well, two exciting announcements, I think. So I had a vested interest in asking the question about fashion because SLYCAN Trust is going to launch a new project, which is focusing on fashion and climate change. And we completed one of the first interviews today with one of the main entities working on fashion in Sri Lanka. So we'll be very interested to engage with you in this discussion. And thank you for the research that you shared and the inputs, because I think most of the communities, vulnerable communities, find this as one of the options for employment in most of our countries. And there are interlinks of either working in a factory, apparel factory, or migrating. So going to the second one, the second announcement is tomorrow is the International Migration Day. So we have something lined up for that. And how migration, even to go abroad for work, connects with climate change and climate-induced human mobility. And we have, well, not a too long panel, so please do join us. If you can, Professor Hack and Dr. Mustafa as well, we'll be happy to add you to the list of discussants. So we have Professor Christina Boyd, who will be speaking on the legal aspects of things, IOM Sri Lanka, then our partners in Ghana and Niger, who work with us on research related to climate-induced migration. And then one of our other partners in Bangladesh as well will be also contributing. So please do join us, those who are attending, and also both Professor Hack and Dr. Gee, if you have time. We look forward to engaging with you in the future work, and also we are very grateful that you're very generous with your time whenever we ask you to join us and contribute and share your knowledge. So over to you, Sani, to wrap it for the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Vasudha. And looks like the end of the Youth Forum means the beginning of lots of exciting things for us here at SLYCAN Trust. So thank you, Dr. Mustafa and Professor Hack, once again for your time. I know it's late for even, I think for Professor Hack it's much later than it is for us. But thank you very much for joining. It has been a pleasure and it's been a real honor to moderate this. And thank you to all of our participants for staying up this late here in Sri Lanka. And to all those who joined us on Facebook. Tomorrow is the last day of our Youth Forum. So we have a few interesting panels, and actually most interestingly at the end of tomorrow's session, from 4 to 6 p.m. Central European Time, we have the presentation of our project pictures where our breakout groups have been working on for the past 2 days. So I would like to invite Professor Hack and Dr. Mustafa, if you all are available, kindly do join us as well. But if not, until then, we will see you all tomorrow, hopefully at the session on migration and also the rest of the Youth Forum as well. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
And good luck. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You.